The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of the National Museum as Marcus A. Thompson adjusted his security badge and checked his watch. 23 years he had worked these halls, watching over priceless artifacts and ensuring visitors respected the sacred space of history. His weathered hands smoothed his uniform as he took his position near the main entrance, greeting early visitors with his characteristic warm smile. Marcus had seen it all during his decades of service. School children who touched displays despite clear warnings, photography enthusiasts who ignored flash restrictions, and the occasional visitor who thought rules didn't apply to them. But nothing quite prepared him for what would unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in September. The first sign of trouble came at precisely 10:47 a.m. when a tall man in an expensive suit strode through the entrance doors. He bypassed the information desk entirely, his designer shoes clicking against the polished floor with an air of supreme confidence. The man's platinum watch caught the light as he gestured dismissively at the posted museum guidelines, clearly indicating he had little interest in reading them. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus called out politely, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone accustomed to guiding visitors. "I need to inform you about our photography policies before you proceed into the galleries." The man turned slowly, his cold blue eyes scanning Marcus from head to toe with obvious disdain. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" His accent carried hints of European sophistication, though his tone suggested anything but politeness. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor despite the dismissive response. "I'm the head security guard here. I wanted to make sure you understand our rules about flash photography and touching the exhibits. We have some very delicate pieces on display today." The stranger's lips curled into what might charitably be called a smile. "Rules," he repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. "I suppose you don't realize who you're speaking to." Before Marcus could respond, the man had already turned away and begun walking toward the ancient civilization's wing. His movements suggested someone accustomed to getting his way, someone who had rarely been told no in his privileged life. Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest. In his years of experience, he had learned to recognize the type, usually wealthy tourists who believed money exempted them from basic courtesy and respect for cultural institutions. These encounters rarely ended well, but Marcus had learned patience was often the best initial approach, following at a respectful distance. Marcus watched as the man entered the Egyptian gallery. Almost immediately, the visitor pulled out an expensive camera and began taking photos with the flash enabled. Despite large signs clearly prohibiting such photography, the bright flashes reflected off the protective glass cases, potentially damaging the ancient papyrus scrolls and delicate textiles within. "Sir." "Please," Marcus approached again, his voice remaining calm but firm. "Flash photography can cause irreversible damage to these artifacts. Some of these pieces are over 3,000 years old." The man lowered his camera with exaggerated slowness. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "I've paid good money to be here, and I'll photograph whatever I please. Perhaps you should find something more suitable to your capabilities." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but years of training kicked in. He had dealt with difficult people before, but this level of arrogance was unusual, even by museum standards. "Sir, these rules exist to preserve history for future generations. I'm going to have to ask you to put the camera away or leave the premises." The response was immediate and explosive. "Are you threatening me?" The man's voice rose sharply, causing other visitors to turn and stare. "Do you have any idea what kind of connections I have? I could have this entire museum shut down with a single phone call." Marcus remained steady, though his hand instinctively moved toward his radio. "I'm not threatening anyone, sir. I'm simply doing my job in protecting irreplaceable cultural artifacts." The stranger stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space in an obvious attempt at intimidation. "Your job? Your job is to stay out of my way. I didn't come here to be lectured by some minimum-wage security guard who probably never finished high school." The insult hit its mark, but Marcus's expression didn't change. He had indeed dropped out of high school to care for his sick mother, eventually earning his GED while working nights to support his family. But he had also spent decades learning about the artifacts he protected, studying their histories and significance until he could recite details that amazed visiting scholars. Sir. I'm going to ask you one final time to comply with museum policies. If you continue to disrupt other visitors and ignore safety protocols, I'll have no choice but to call for additional assistance. The man's laugh was sharp and humorless. Additional assistance? What are you going to do? Call more security guards? I'd like to see you try to remove me from this building. Marcus's hand moved to his radio, but he paused when he noticed other visitors had begun gathering at a safe distance, their phones discreetly recording the escalating confrontation. He could see the mixture of curiosity and concern on their faces, along with a few expressions of clear disapproval directed at the disruptive visitor. The stranger noticed the growing audience and seemed to feed off their attention. He raised his camera again and took several more flash photographs, this time deliberately aiming at the most sensitive displays. The bright flashes illuminated ancient burial masks and delicate jewelry that had survived millennia only to be potentially damaged by one man's arrogance. "Stop that immediately," Marcus said, his voice carrying new authority. "You're damaging priceless artifacts." "Prove it," the man replied smugly, taking another photograph. "Show me one piece of evidence that my camera is causing damage. Until then, I'll do whatever I want." Marcus realized he was dealing with someone who had no intention of listening to reason. This wasn't simple ignorance or misunderstanding. This was deliberate defiance from someone who believed himself above consequences. The situation had moved beyond normal visitor management into something requiring immediate intervention. As he reached for his radio to call for backup, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what kind of person felt so entitled that they would risk damaging great, irreplaceable pieces of human history simply to prove a point. Whatever happened next, he knew this confrontation was far from over. Marcus pressed the button on his radio, and his voice carried through the museum's security network with practiced calm. "Control, this is Marcus in Egyptian Gallery. I need immediate backup for a non-compliant visitor who is deliberately damaging exhibits with unauthorized flash photography." The response crackled back within seconds. "Copy that, Marcus. Sending Davis and Rodriguez to your location. Estimated arrival, 2 minutes." The stranger overheard the radio exchange, and his expression shifted from smug confidence to something approaching concern, though he quickly masked it with renewed arrogance. "You actually called for backup? This is ridiculous. I'm a paying customer, not some common criminal." Marcus maintained his position between the man and the most vulnerable displays. "Sir, damaging museum property is a criminal offense, regardless of your ticket purchase. I strongly advise you to cooperate when my colleagues arrive." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with visitors pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming an extraordinary situation. Among them, Marcus noticed Dr. Sarah Chen, the museum's chief curator, who had emerged from her office after hearing about the disturbance. Her face showed a mixture of professional concern and barely controlled anger as she witnessed someone deliberately threatening her life's work, the disruptive. Visitors seemed to notice the growing audience and the presence of what appeared to be museum staff. For the first time since entering the building, uncertainty flickered across his features. But rather than backing down, he doubled down on his aggressive behavior. "This is harassment," he announced loudly, addressing the crowd as much as Marcus. "This security guard is preventing me from enjoying the museum I paid to visit. I'm being discriminated against simply because of how I'm dressed." Several visitors exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the absurdity of his claim. They had all witnessed his deliberate disregard for clearly posted rules and his rude treatment of Marcus, who had remained professional throughout the encounter. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades protecting cultural heritage. "Sir, I'm Dr. Chen, the chief curator of this institution. The security guard is absolutely correct about our photography policies. Flash photography can cause irreversible fading and deterioration to organic materials that have survived thousands of years." The stranger turned his dismissive attention to Dr. Chen. "And you are? Some museum bureaucrat trying to justify unnecessary restrictions? These artifacts have survived this long. I hardly think my camera is going to destroy them." Dr. Chen's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing her genuine anger. I have a doctorate in Egyptology and have spent 30 years studying and preserving these exact pieces. Some of these papyrus fragments are so delicate that even normal lighting is carefully controlled. Your flash photography is literally causing molecular-level damage. Molecular-level damage? The man repeated mockingly. How convenient that the damage is invisible. Perfect excuse to harass visitors. Marcus could see his backup approaching from the far end of the gallery. Officers Davis and Rodriguez moved with the practiced efficiency of experienced museum security, their presence immediately changing the dynamic of the situation. Both were larger than Marcus and carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to handling difficult situations. Davis took point as they approached. "Good morning, sir. I understand there's been some confusion about our photography policies. Perhaps we can resolve this quickly and allow you to continue enjoying your visit." The stranger's confidence wavered as he found himself facing 3 security officers and a senior curator. For the first time, he seemed to grasp that his behavior might have actual consequences. "There's no confusion," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier arrogance. "I was simply taking photographs when this guard began harassing me." Rodriguez positioned himself casually but strategically near the exit, while Davis maintained a non-threatening but firm posture. "Sir, we've reviewed the situation with our head of security. Multiple witnesses observed you taking flash photographs after being informed about museum policies. We'd like to resolve this peacefully." The crowd had grown to nearly 20 people, all watching the drama unfold with fascination. Among them, Marcus noticed a well-dressed woman who seemed particularly interested in the confrontation. She was taking notes on her phone while observing the stranger's behavior with what appeared to be professional interest. Dr. Chen addressed the crowd briefly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this disruption. The Egyptian gallery will remain open, but we ask that you give our security team space to resolve this situation." Most visitors nodded understandingly and began moving to other areas of the gallery, though several lingered within earshot, clearly reluctant to miss the conclusion of the confrontation. The stranger seemed to realize his audience was disappearing. His position was becoming increasingly untenable. "This is absurd," he said, his voice rising again. "I'm going to report this entire museum to the tourism board. You'll all be looking for new jobs by the end of the week." Marcus felt a surge of protectiveness for his colleagues in the institution he had served faithfully for over 2 decades. "Sir, we're simply asking you to follow the same rules that millions of visitors respect every year. No one is targeting you personally. It's rules made by people who have never accomplished anything meaningful in their lives." The stranger snapped, his composure finally cracking completely. "I've built companies, created jobs, contributed more to society than any of you ever will. And now I'm being lectured by museum guards and academics who live off taxpayer funding." The insult to Dr. Chen's life work and dedication visibly angered several remaining visitors. One elderly man stepped forward slightly. "Son, I've been visiting this museum for 40 years, and these people are treasures. They've preserved history for all of us. You should be thanking them, not insulting them." Davis decided it was time to take more direct action. "Sir, I need to see some identification, and we need to have a serious conversation about your behavior here today." The stranger's eyes darted toward the exit, where Rodriguez waited with professional patience. For the first time since entering the museum, he appeared to understand that his wealth and connections might not shield him from the consequences of his actions. Identification. What am I? Some kind of suspect? This is completely unreasonable. Dr. Chen spoke quietly but firmly. "Sir, when someone deliberately damages cultural property after being warned about policies, yes, we do need to document the incident. This isn't about your status or background. This is about protecting irreplaceable artifacts for future generations." As the stranger reluctantly reached for his wallet, Marcus wondered what they would discover about their difficult visitor. Something about the man's desperate arrogance suggested there might be more to this story than simple tourist entitlement. The way he had immediately mentioned connections and threatened consequences seemed practiced, as if he was accustomed to using his influence to avoid accountability. Whatever they learned from his identification would likely explain much about his behavior, possibly determine what happened next. The stranger's hand hesitated as he reached for his wallet, and Marcus noticed the subtle change in his demeanor. The aggressive confidence had shifted to something more calculating, as if he was weighing his options carefully. When he finally produced his identification, Davis examined it with professional thoroughness. "Alexander Thornfield," Davis read aloud, though his expression remained neutral. "Address shows London, England. Business visa valid through next month." Dr. Chen's eyes widened slightly at the name. "Thornfield Industries?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of recognition that made everyone pay closer attention. Alexander's chin lifted with renewed arrogance. Finally, someone with intelligence recognizes the name. "Yes, Thornfield Industries. Perhaps now you understand why this harassment is completely inappropriate." Marcus had never heard of Thornfield Industries, but Dr. Chen's reaction suggested it was significant. However, her expression was troubled rather than impressed, which struck him as unusual if this man was truly as important as he claimed. The well-dressed woman, who had been taking notes, stepped forward, her movement purposeful and confident. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the group with professional authority. "I'm Jessica Martinez from the Tourism Review Board. I was conducting a routine inspection when I witnessed this entire incident." Alexander's face went pale. "Tourism Review Board? That's not. I was simply trying to document my visit for business purposes." Jessica consulted her phone, scrolling through notes she had taken during the confrontation. "Mr. Thornfield, I observed you deliberately violating clearly posted museum policies, refusing multiple polite requests from staff, and using threatening language toward museum employees. This is precisely the kind of behavior that reflects poorly on international visitors." Dr. Chen looked at Jessica with newfound interest. "The Tourism Review Board conducts surprise inspections of cultural institutions. We monitor visitor experiences and staff professionalism," Jessica explained. "We also document cases where visitors abuse cultural sites or mistreat local staff. Mr. Thornfield's behavior today has been extraordinarily poor, especially given his claims of business importance." Alexander seemed to shrink under this unexpected scrutiny. "There's been a misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to damage anything. I simply didn't realize the significance of the photography restrictions." Marcus couldn't help but speak up. "Sir, you were clearly informed about the restrictions multiple times. You specifically stated you would do whatever you wanted regardless of the rules." "I may have spoken hastily," Alexander mumbled. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Business stress can make people say things they don't mean." Jessica continued making notes. "Mr. Thornfield, are you traveling on business or pleasure today?" The question seemed to make Alexander increasingly uncomfortable. "Business, naturally. I'm investigating potential cultural investment opportunities for my company." Dr. Chen exchanged glances with Marcus. Something about Alexander's claim didn't ring true, especially given his complete disregard for the cultural significance of the artifacts he had been photographing. "What type of cultural investments does Thornfield Industries typically pursue?" Dr. Chen inquired, her academic curiosity clearly piqued. Alexander's response was vague and unconvincing. "Various cultural preservation projects, international partnerships, that sort of thing." Davis had been quietly speaking into his radio while the others questioned Alexander. Now he approached the group with new information. "I've run the identification through our system, Mr. Thornfield. You were banned from the British Museum in London last month for similar disruptive behavior." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Alexander's face flushed deep red as all eyes turned to him. That was a completely different situation, a misunderstanding about their policies. Jessica looked up from her notes with obvious skepticism. "Similar disruptive behavior at another major cultural institution? Mr. Thornfield, this suggests a pattern rather than an isolated incident." Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. This wasn't simply an arrogant tourist having a bad day. This was someone with a history of problematic behavior at cultural sites, possibly someone who used his business connections to avoid consequences for inappropriate conduct. Dr. Chen's expression had hardened considerably. "Mr. Thornfield, if you're genuinely interested in cultural preservation, you would understand why these protective measures exist. Your behavior suggests the opposite of someone who respects cultural heritage." Alexander looked around desperately, searching for any sympathetic face among the group. Finding none, he tried a different approach. Look, I apologize if my behavior was inappropriate. I've been under tremendous business pressure lately. Perhaps we can resolve this quietly, without involving any official reports. Quietly? Jessica repeated. Mr. Thornfield, your behavior today was witnessed by numerous museum visitors. You threatened staff members, deliberately damaged historical artifacts, and showed complete disrespect for an important cultural institution. This is exactly the kind of incident that must be reported. Rodriguez, who had remained silent throughout most of the exchange, finally spoke up. Sir, we also need to address the potential damage to the artifacts from your flash photography. Our conservation team will need to assess whether any pieces require additional preservation work due to your actions. The mention of conservation costs seemed to alarm Alexander. More than anything else that had been said, damage. But you said the damage was molecular level, essentially invisible. How can you prove my photographs caused any problems? Dr. Chen's voice was ice cold. We document the condition of every artifact regularly using specialized equipment. Any changes in deterioration patterns can be traced to specific incidents. If our conservation team determines that your flash photography accelerated damage to irreplaceable artifacts, you could be liable for restoration costs that reach into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Alexander's face went white. Hundreds of thousands? That's impossible. They're just old objects. The dismissive comment created a moment of shocked silence. Even the few remaining visitors looked appalled at his characterization of priceless historical artifacts as just old objects. Marcus found his voice first. Sir, those old objects are irreplaceable pieces of human history. Some of them are the only surviving examples of ancient artistic techniques or historical events. Their value isn't just monetary. They're part of humanity's cultural heritage. Jessica continued writing furiously. Mr. Thornfield, your attitude toward cultural heritage is deeply concerning, especially for someone claiming to work in cultural investment. I'll be recommending that your business visa be reviewed for early termination. The threat of visa revocation seemed to finally break through Alexander's arrogance completely. Please, that's not necessary. I need to complete my business here. Perhaps we can work out some arrangement. Davis stepped forward with authority. Mr. Thornfield, at this point, we need to complete an incident report and have you speak with museum administration about the potential damage to exhibits. Your cooperation will be noted, but the formal process must continue. Alexander looked around the group one more time, apparently realizing that his wealth and connections couldn't shield him from the consequences of his behavior. The situation had spiraled far beyond what he had anticipated when he first dismissed Marcus's polite requests to follow museum policies as they prepared to escort him to the administrative offices. Marcus reflected on how quickly the morning had transformed from routine visitor management to a complex international incident involving tourism boards and potential diplomatic consequences. The museum's administrative conference room felt distinctly different from the public galleries. Here, surrounded by filing cabinets and official documentation, the gravity of Alexander's situation became increasingly apparent. Museum Director Patricia Walsh had been summoned from her morning meetings, and her presence brought an additional level of seriousness to the proceedings. Mr. Thornfield, Director Walsh began, her voice carrying decades of authority earned through managing one of the world's premier cultural institutions. I've been briefed on this morning's incident. This is highly unusual, even by our standards for difficult visitors. Alexander sat rigidly in his chair, his expensive suit now seeming more like a costume than a symbol of success. The confident businessman who had entered the museum that morning had been replaced by someone clearly out of his depth. Director Walsh, I want to emphasize that any damage claims are premature. I was simply documenting my visit. Marcus stood near the door, having been asked to remain as a primary witness to the incident. He watched as Jessica Martinez continued taking detailed notes while Dr. Chen prepared a tablet displaying high-resolution images of the affected artifacts. Let me show you something. Mr. Thornfield, Dr. Chen said, turning the tablet screen toward him. These are photographs taken this morning immediately after your flash photography session. Do you see these subtle color variations in the papyrus fragments? Alexander squinted at the screen with obvious confusion. They look like old paper to me. I don't see any differences. Dr. Chen's patience was clearly strained. These old papers are 3,000-year-old documents, containing some of the earliest known mathematical calculations. The color variations indicate areas where the organic fibers have begun deteriorating more rapidly due to light exposure. But that could have happened from anything, Alexander protested. Normal lighting, age, humidity. You can't prove my camera caused that, Director Walsh intervened. Mr. Thornfield, our conservation team uses scientific equipment to monitor light exposure on all artifacts. Every piece in our collection is photographed weekly using specialized cameras that detect changes invisible to the human eye. We can absolutely prove when accelerated deterioration occurs and what caused it. The revelation seemed to surprise Alexander. His understanding of museum operations was clearly limited to what he might have gleaned from casual visits or movies. The reality of scientific conservation practices was apparently beyond his comprehension. Jessica looked up from her notes. Director Walsh, I should mention that my investigation has uncovered additional information about Mr. Thornfield's business activities. All eyes turned to her as she consulted her phone. I contacted colleagues in London after learning about his previous ban from the British Museum. Thornfield Industries appears to be involved in acquiring cultural artifacts for private collectors, often using questionable legal methods. Alexander's face went ashen. That's completely untrue. We operate entirely within legal boundaries, perhaps Jessica continued. But your company has been investigated multiple times for attempting to purchase artifacts that may have been illegally removed from their countries of origin. Your presence here, combined with your deliberate disregard for preservation protocols, suggests you may have been attempting to gather intelligence on security measures. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus found himself reassessing everything about the morning's incident. Alexander's aggressive photography, his dismissive attitude toward preservation, his immediate threats and claims of connections, it all painted a different picture than simple tourist entitlement. Director Walsh leaned forward. Mr. Thornfield, are you suggesting you're here as a legitimate tourist, or were you conducting some form of reconnaissance for your business activities? That's a ridiculous accusation, Alexander stammered. I'm simply a businessman who made some mistakes this morning. You're turning this into some kind of international conspiracy. Dr. Chen spoke quietly, but with obvious concern. Director Walsh, if he was gathering information about our security protocols and preservation methods, we need to review what he may have observed beyond the Egyptian gallery. Marcus remembered Alexander's confident navigation through the museum, his immediate dismissal of posted guidelines, and his apparent familiarity with intimidation tactics. Ma'am, he seemed to know exactly where he was going when he entered the building. He didn't stop at information or ask for directions to any specific exhibits. Rodriguez, who had been monitoring museum security cameras, entered the room with a tablet of his own. Director Walsh, I've reviewed this morning's security footage. Mr. Thornfield spent approximately 15 minutes in our ancient Mesopotamian collection before moving to the Egyptian gallery. He was photographing not just artifacts, but also security camera positions and staff patrol patterns. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Alexander's morning visit was looking less like tourist photography and more like professional surveillance. Alexander stood abruptly. This is insane. I want to contact my embassy immediately. You're treating me like some kind of criminal based on speculation and coincidence. Sit down, Mr. Thornfield, Director Walsh commanded with authority that brooked no argument. You're free to contact your embassy, but first we're going to complete our investigation. If you were indeed conducting surveillance of our security measures, that's a matter for law enforcement, not diplomatic channels. Jessica continued reading from her phone. Director Walsh, I've also discovered that Thornfield Industries has been flagged by Interpol for potential involvement in trafficking stolen cultural artifacts. They're not currently under indictment, but they're considered a company of interest in ongoing investigations. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What had begun as a routine management issue had potentially uncovered an international art trafficking operation conducting surveillance at a major Museum Marcus felt a strange mixture of pride and concern. His simple enforcement of photography policies had potentially prevented a serious security breach, but it had also revealed threats to cultural heritage that extended far beyond their institution. Alexander slumped in his chair, apparently realizing that his situation had moved far beyond museum policy violations. "I want a lawyer," he said quietly. "I'm not saying anything else without legal representation." Director Walsh nodded to Rodriguez, who stepped toward the door. "We'll be contacting federal authorities who specialize in cultural property crimes. This is no longer a museum disciplinary matter." As Rodriguez left to make the necessary calls, Marcus wondered how many other cultural institutions Alexander and his associates might have targeted. The man's practiced arrogance, an immediate resort to intimidation. Tactics suggested this wasn't his first attempt at gathering intelligence on museum security protocols, the morning that had started with a simple request to follow. Photography rules had evolved into something that could potentially protect cultural heritage sites around the world. Marcus looked at his colleagues with new appreciation for the importance of their work and the vigilance required to protect humanity's irreplaceable cultural treasures. The investigation was just beginning, but already it was clear that Alexander Thornfield's rude behavior had been far more than simple tourist entitlement. It had been a window into a much larger and more dangerous world that threatened the very artifacts they had all dedicated their careers to protecting. The conference room had transformed into an impromptu command center as federal agents arrived within hours of Rodriguez's call. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell from the FBI's art crime team spread documents across the table while her partner, gated David Park, set up laptop computers, displaying surveillance footage from multiple museums across 3 continents. Alexander Thornfield sat handcuffed to his chair, his expensive suit now wrinkled and his earlier arrogance replaced by sullen silence. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Catherine Price, had arrived 30 minutes earlier and was reviewing paperwork with obvious concern. Director Walsh, Agent Mitchell began. "Your security guard's intervention this morning may have prevented a significant intelligence breach. We've been tracking Thornfield Industries for 18 months as part of a larger investigation into international art trafficking networks." Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with disbelief. His simple insistence on following museum policies had apparently disrupted a sophisticated criminal operation. He listened intently as Agent Mitchell continued her briefing. "Thornfield Industries operates as a legitimate cultural consulting firm, but our investigation suggests they've been conducting surveillance at major museums worldwide. They gather information about security protocols, staff schedules, and conservation procedures, then sell this intelligence to criminal organizations that specialize in art theft." Dr. Chen leaned forward with obvious alarm. "Agent Mitchell, are you saying they've been targeting our collection specifically?" Agent Park turned his laptop screen toward the group, displaying a map dotted with red markers. "These represent museums where Thornfield or his associates have been documented conducting similar surveillance operations. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and a dozen others." The scope of the operation was staggering. Marcus realized that Alexander's behavior that morning hadn't been random rudeness but calculated intelligence, gathering disguised as tourist photography. "Jessica." Martinez looked up from her notes with satisfaction. "Agent Mitchell, I assume my documentation of his behavior will be useful for your investigation." "Absolutely. Tourism Review Board inspectors like yourself provide crucial oversight that helps identify suspicious activity. Your real-time documentation of his threats and policy violations establishes a clear pattern of criminal behavior." Alexander's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear before addressing the room. "My client maintains his innocence of any criminal wrongdoing. His photography this morning was legitimate tourist documentation, and any intelligence-gathering accusations are purely speculative." Agent Mitchell opened a thick folder. "Ms. Price, your client's camera contained 847 photographs, taken over the past month at cultural institutions across North America and Europe. The vast majority focused not on artifacts but on security cameras, guard positions, and staff access points. The evidence was damning. Even Alexander seemed to shrink further into his chair as the scope of the federal investigation became clear. Director Walsh addressed Agent Mitchell directly. "What does this mean for our museum's security? Should we be concerned about additional threats?" "We believe this morning's incident effectively ended their surveillance of your institution," Agent Park replied. "However, we'll be recommending enhanced security protocols and providing you with intelligence about other known associates who might attempt similar operations." Dr. Chen raised another concern. "Agent Mitchell, what about the artifacts that were exposed to his flash photography?" "We're still assessing potential damage." Agent Mitchell nodded seriously. "Those damages will be included in the federal charges. Art trafficking organizations cause millions of dollars in preservation damage each year through their intelligence gathering operations. Most people don't realize that simply documenting security measures can facilitate future thefts that result in irreplaceable losses to human heritage." Marcus felt a deep sense of validation. Every day for 23 years, he had explained to visitors why museum policies mattered, why preservation protocols existed, and why everyone needed to follow the same rules. Most people understood and complied willingly, but occasionally someone like Alexander would challenge the system. Today had proven that even seemingly minor violations could be connected to serious criminal activity. Alexander's lawyer made one final attempt at damage control. "Agents, surely we can work out some kind of cooperation agreement. My client has information about other organizations involved in this type of activity." Agent Park exchanged glances with his partner. "Ms. Price, your client's cooperation will be noted, but the charges related to today's incident stand regardless. Cultural property crimes are federal offenses with serious penalties." Jessica closed her notebook with obvious satisfaction. "Director Walsh, I'll be filing a commendation report for your security staff. The professionalism and vigilance demonstrated today prevented what could have been a significant security breach." Director Walsh turned to Marcus with genuine appreciation. 23 years of dedicated service. And today, you may have protected not just our museum, but cultural institutions worldwide. Your insistence on following protocols and calling for assistance when needed exemplifies exactly what professional security work should accomplish. Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest. Throughout the morning's chaos, he had simply tried to do his job properly and treat everyone with professional respect, even when that respect wasn't returned. Learning that his actions had broader significance beyond their museum made the difficult confrontation worthwhile. Agent Mitchell began packing her files. Thornfield will be processed on federal charges, including conspiracy to commit theft of cultural property, surveillance of federal facilities, and destruction of historical artifacts. The investigation will continue, but today's incident has provided crucial evidence for prosecuting the entire network. As the agents prepared to escort Alexander from the building, his lawyer made one final statement. "Director Walsh, my client regrets any inconvenience caused to your institution today." Alexander himself said nothing, his silence a stark contrast to the aggressive threats and claims of importance that had characterized his morning behavior. The wealthy businessman who had dismissed museum staff as beneath his consideration was leaving in handcuffs. Facing federal prosecution for crimes that could result in years in prison, Dr. Chen approached Marcus as the room began clearing. "I've been working in museums for 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. Your dedication to protecting our collection revealed something none of us suspected." Marcus watched through the window as Alexander was led to a federal vehicle, reflecting on how the morning had unfolded. What had started as a routine request to follow photography policies had exposed an international criminal conspiracy and potentially prevented serious damage to cultural heritage sites worldwide. The validation was deeply satisfying, but more importantly, the incident had reinforced why museum policies existed and why everyone, regardless of their wealth or claimed importance, needed to respect the institutions that preserved humanity's shared cultural heritage. His radio crackled to life with routine communications about visitor questions and minor issues throughout the building. Marcus smiled as he prepared to return to his regular duties, knowing that his vigilant professionalism served a purpose far beyond what most people realized. 3 weeks after Alexander Thornfield's arrest, The National Museum had returned to its normal rhythm of scholarly visitors, school groups, and cultural enthusiasts. Marcus walked through the Egyptian gallery during his morning rounds, noting how peaceful the space felt compared to that chaotic Tuesday morning that had changed everything: the conservation team's assessment had revealed significant damage to 3 papyrus fragments and 1 ancient textile. With restoration costs exceeding $180,000, Alexander's flash photography had indeed accelerated deterioration that would normally occur over decades. Compressing centuries of aging into minutes of exposure, the scientific evidence was irrefutable. Adding serious financial penalties to his federal charges, Marcus paused at the display case where the confrontation had begun. Remembering Alexander's dismissive attitude toward artifacts he had called just old objects, the papyrus fragments inside were currently undergoing emergency conservation treatment, their survival uncertain after 3 millennia of existence, only to be damaged by one man's arrogance and criminal intent. Dr. Chen approached with a tablet in hand, her expression mixing satisfaction with ongoing concern. "Marcus, I wanted to update you on the broader investigation. Agent Mitchell called this morning with remarkable news." She showed him her tablet displaying news headlines from international media outlets. Alexander's arrest triggered a chain reaction across the art crime network. Authorities in 7 countries have conducted raids based on intelligence found in his files. They've recovered stolen artifacts worth over $50 million and arrested 23 people involved in international trafficking operations. Marcus studied the headlines with amazement. Names of famous museums appeared repeatedly as institutions that had been surveilled by Thornfield's network. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering, reaching into some of the world's most prestigious cultural centers. More importantly, Dr. Chen continued, they've prevented planned thefts at 4 major museums, including a scheme targeting our own Mesopotamian collection that was scheduled for next month. The revelation sent chills down Marcus's spine. Alexander's surveillance that morning had been preparation for an actual theft attempt that would have resulted in irreplaceable losses to human cultural heritage. His simple insistence on following photography policies had prevented what could have been devastating raids on multiple institutions. Jessica Martinez appeared around the corner, smiling broadly as she approached them. Her surprise inspection 3 weeks earlier had evolved into consultation work with federal authorities on improving cultural institution security protocols. "Marcus, perfect timing," she said warmly. "I wanted to personally thank you again for your professionalism during the incident. Your actions have been cited in tourism security training programs being implemented across 12 countries." The recognition was overwhelming. Marcus had spent his entire career simply trying to do his job well, treating every visitor with respect while protecting the artifacts entrusted to his care. Learning that his approach was being used as a training model for international security, personnel felt surreal. Director Walsh emerged from her office carrying official-looking documents. "Marcus, I have some news that I think you'll appreciate. The International Association of Museum Security has selected you for their Distinguished Service Award. You'll be recognized at their annual conference in Geneva next month." Marcus felt his eyes welling with emotion. The boy who had dropped out of high school to care for his sick mother, who had spent decades being dismissed by people who assumed security guards were uneducated, was being honored by international professionals for his dedication and expertise. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. I was just doing my job." "You were doing far more than your job," Director Walsh replied firmly. "Your knowledge of conservation principles, your respect for cultural heritage, and your professional handling of a dangerous situation exemplify what museum security should represent." Dr. Chen nodded in agreement. "Marcus, during the investigation, agents discovered that Alexander had specifically targeted institutions where security staff were perceived as less educated or professional. Your depth of knowledge about our artifacts and their historical significance disrupted their assumptions and forced them to reveal more of their intentions than planned." The irony was striking. Alexander's condescending comments about education and social status had been projections of ignorance, not assessments of reality. Marcus's years of self-directed learning about Egyptian civilization, conservation science, and cultural preservation had made him more knowledgeable about the artifacts than many visitors with advanced degrees. Agent Mitchell arrived unexpectedly. Approaching the group with obvious satisfaction, "I apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to deliver some final updates personally. Alexander Thornfield pled guilty yesterday to all federal charges. He's facing 15 years in federal prison and full restitution for conservation damages." She turned specifically to Marcus. His plea included cooperation that led to the recovery of artifacts stolen from museums in Egypt, Iraq, and Peru over the past decade. Some pieces thought lost forever are being returned to their countries of origin because of your intervention. That morning, Marcus felt the weight of cultural responsibility that had driven his career for over 2 decades. Every day, he protected not just objects, but connections to human civilizations that would otherwise be lost to future generations. Today's recognition affirmed that his dedication served purposes far beyond individual museum visits. A group of visiting students approached the Egyptian gallery, their teacher leading them toward the displays with obvious enthusiasm. Marcus excused himself from the conversation to greet them. Falling naturally into his role as educator and protector of cultural heritage, "Welcome to our Egyptian collection," he said warmly to the young visitors. "These artifacts represent some of humanity's greatest achievements in mathematics, medicine, and artistic expression. They've survived thousands of years, and it's our job to make sure they survive thousands more." The students listened attentively as Marcus explained the significance of each display, his passion for preservation evident in every word. Their teachers smiled appreciatively, recognizing the depth of knowledge and dedication that made museum visits truly educational experiences. As the group moved deeper into the gallery, Marcus reflected on how the morning's confrontation with Alexander had reinforced rather than shaken his faith in the importance of cultural institutions. Museums existed to preserve and share human heritage with people who approached them with curiosity and respect. Protecting that mission from those who would exploit or damage it was both privilege and responsibility. His radio crackled with routine communications about visitor questions and minor issues throughout the building. Marcus smiled as he responded, knowing that his vigilant professionalism served not just their institution, but cultural preservation efforts. Worldwide, the Egyptian gallery returned to its normal atmosphere of quiet, scholarship, and respectful appreciation. Visitors moved thoughtfully between displays, some taking photographs without flash, others simply absorbing the presence of artifacts that connected them to civilizations that had flourished millennia before their birth. Marcus resumed his rounds, greeting visitors with his characteristic warmth, while maintaining the professional vigilance that protected irreplaceable treasures. His 23 years of dedicated service had been validated in ways he never could have imagined, but more importantly, his commitment to cultural preservation continued with renewed purpose and recognition. The morning sun streamed through the gallery windows, illuminating artifacts that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the development of human knowledge, and the eternal human drive to create beauty and meaning. Marcus walked among them with deep satisfaction, knowing that his work helped ensure these connections to human heritage would endure for future generations to discover and appreciate.